We're here in San Francisco, California, in Potrero Hill, the current HQ of Chroma with CTO Anton Troynikov. We're moving soon. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, we're moving over to the mission.
Yes, which is exciting. So first question is, can you tell me about, the main episode that we shot a while back was all about the company, your guys' approach to building it. Can you tell me about your background that led to founding Chroma?
Yeah, so I worked in applied AI for about 7 years before starting this company. And actually, the original founding story of the company comes from Jeff and my background in applied AI, right? The founding story of Chroma is we were looking for ways and working on ideas to understand the performance and behavior of models from the perspective of how models process data, right? One of the hardest things in sort of applied machine learning and industry has always been, I've made the model, I've trained it, I've deployed it, how do I actually make it better? And the typical story is, oh, we're just gonna shovel data into it and kind of hope. And I actually have a very specific mental image in my head every time I think about that problem. And I used to work for a robotics company a couple of years ago, back in 2018 through about 2020, where we would have these lunchtime meetings doing triage for errors that the robot did on the road. And you'd be sitting in these meetings and it's probably, 20 plus robotics engineers, which, as you can imagine, fairly highly paid people. You don't get them cheap. And they're all looking at the log from the robot, and there's a stop sign detector that's just flickering. And then you'd kind of be like, why is that flickering? Mm-hmm. And you'd be doing all of this work on the, I was on the perception team, but there's other teams like the planning prediction team. You'd be doing all this work to mitigate the poor output of the machine learning model because nobody really knew how to actually improve the model itself, right? And so I never wanted to sit in that room at lunchtime ever again. And that's kind of the founding story. It's how we got started. And then people always ask me okay, well, that doesn't sound a lot like vector databases or retrieval. And it doesn't, but the approach that we took to solving that problem was, as I mentioned, about looking at the internal representation of the model's data, which is the embedding space, which is vectors, right? It's all vectors, and we needed to build a system that can store, manage, and process vectors. And then in late November of 22, when people started building AI applications on top of the large language model, it pretty much became clear that everybody now needed a system to do that in a lot of different contexts, not just the product experiments that we were doing. So it was a natural step. And one thing that's very interesting is the retrieval problem is actually a lot like the perception problem in robotics. It's got a lot in common in the way that you need to think about it. And so a lot of what I learned and a lot of the experiences I've had very naturally translated. And a lot of the math does too, which is very helpful.
For the layman, can you sort of explain the difference between a normal database and a vector database?
Yeah, absolutely. So in a normal database or a relational database, typically you're dealing with a discrete structure of data, right? And what I mean by that is whether or not a particular entry in the database fits a query is usually a binary decision. It either does or doesn't, right? In a vector database, which is at the core of what Chroma is building, you are dealing with something that's much more continuous. So what I mean by that, instead of data being represented as a row in a table with fields that you can match or not match with a query, data is represented by a point in continuous space. And what you're looking for is points that are near each other, having similar properties, similar meanings under a certain definition of meaning, and points that are further apart don't mean the same, right? So, birds and airplanes might be close together in one dimension because they're both things that fly, but far apart in another dimension because one is an animal and one isn't, right? So it represents meaning in these different ways, and that allows you to query it by finding things with a similar meaning, right? The nearest neighbors in vector space are the things with similar meaning, but it does mean that a query is a much more fuzzy thing in embedding space retrieval than it is in a normal database because there's no clear answer, there's no binary output.
We as humans don't have a sensory organ or ability to kind of, I think, intuit data the way we do other kind of stimulus. Can you talk, how do we as humans sort of need to evolve or change our perspective, not even just traditional, discrete data, but also into this new land of vector data? How do we kind of need to start thinking to change our mental models and our approach to that?
Yeah, that's a really important question. And actually that's core to some of the tooling that we're going to need to build for developers in this new world of semantic search, meanings-based databases. We have to figure it out. At the core is this very simple problem of the vectors that are representing data in Chroma are much higher dimensional than at least I can visualize. Maybe you're much smarter than me and you can see in 756 dimensions, but I can't. And there's a few approaches to that. One way is to take those high dimensional vectors and project them down into spaces that humans can understand. So go from many dimensions down to 3, which we understand because we live in 3-dimensional space. But that doesn't really give you that much, because while you're doing the projection, you're obviously losing information, right? Because you don't get the full dimensionality. But and that also can sort of fool you about what data is actually there. But it is useful in certain aspects. Part of our job right now is exploring the design space of tooling around this type of data. And we really want to support developers in understanding how this works, what's in there. If you think about it, right, like human beings may not be able to think like a SQL database natively, but we could at least look at a table and intuit and understand it. This is a whole different way. Vectors are a whole different way of looking at data. And so we need new tooling around it. I don't have a good answer yet. We have some ideas, but I think it's going to come down to really exploring the design space here. And there's a lot of people like doing the experimentation, doing really great work, because this type of embedding-based retrieval used to only have a few applications, right? If you've used Pinterest, you've used embedding-based retrieval. If Spotify, recommended whatever, that's all embeddings under the hood. But now, if you're building with AI, and of course many more people will build with AI, now it's also your problem, which means it's a bigger problem, but also many more people are interested in solving it and building tooling for it. And so I'm very excited to see what comes out. I don't have a good answer yet, but I'm excited to find out what the answer is.
Well, I just think it's cool talking to you and thinking about like Chroma as a company. It's like, we know what we were filming. You guys made a metaphor that like, we know the country we want to care about, but we've been testing the beachhead. Yeah. And I think it's cool that even still, it's like, we don't quite know the route. We don't quite know, maybe know parts of the route, but like, we know kind of what we want this thing to look like, but there's still some unsolved parts of it. Like, that's incredibly exciting. How do you approach that from a founding, like in a milestone, and a like, what do we build point of view?
Yeah. I think the first thing at the core has to be build the thing that people actually need right now, right? The core problem that every startup has to overcome at the start is that nobody cares about what you're building. You can be tremendously smart and you can spend 3 years building like this absolutely beautiful, perfect thing. And then when you take it to market, it turns out you can't really get anyone to care about it, even though it is perfect and beautiful and does exactly what it says on the box. And so Chroma, while I don't think of us as being a vector database company, brought vector search to market in a form factor that's very useful to AI application development, right? That's the core. That's the core of what we're doing. And having that distribution, being able to get into that market, and we are, now number 1 in this category in open source, which I don't think when we filmed the first time we were yet, but we are now. Cool. Number 1 in open source, number 1 in Python.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. I actually don't quite believe myself saying that, but I play a character who does, and that works okay for me. Having that distribution allows us to have the surface area to understand what people need, right? And taking that feedback and being open source means we get to see a lot of what people are building and the tooling that they might need for it. And people literally like open pull requests against us and raise issues against us and say, hey, this isn't working, or hey, I don't understand how to do this, or like, how does this fit together? And so we can see all of that coming in, and of course that helps us develop our own taste and intuition. Ultimately, I think it comes down to really like the taste and insights of the team building the company about what to build and how to do it.
How does what you're building in your mind sort of differentiate from other RAG solutions or products, or are there just like, I guess, long-term memory or context tools for AI development?
Yeah, I think ultimately it's the mission that we're undertaking. Right? As I said earlier, we don't really think of ourselves as a vector database company. We've got embeddings-based retrieval built in, sure. That's the thing that the market wanted first, and we built it in a really good way. But what we're really about is retrieval for AI. And what I think about when I say that is our job is to bring information to the AI, to the language model, or whatever the AI happens to be in the next couple of iterations, so that it can perform the task that's being asked of it to perform with the data that it's supposed to perform it with. That's a very broad remit, right? Which is why it includes building the developer tooling that we talked about, because you need to understand how that's happening to do it effectively. That focus on AI application development kind of drives everything else, right? It drove our API decisions even at launch back in February of last year, and it's going to continue driving what products we're building. That's a very high-level answer.
Sure.
On a much more low level, technical sort of discussion. Like even our architecture for our distributed system and cloud, which is underway, under development right now, is informed by the way you use retrieval in AI application development. It's not a general purpose vector database. It is specifically built for AI application developers. And then the tools that we build on top of it, the way we turn it into a platform where you as an organization can put all of your organizational data into Chroma and then build applications on top of Chroma to adopt AI inside your organization is all driven by the fact that that's the use case that we care about.
There are a lot of, to talk a little bit less specifically about Chroma and more the greater AI space, there are a lot of AI companies.
That's great.
Being built. I think personally, a lot of it is kind of chaff or maybe not as legit or deep as other things. And I'm not someone that feels like every single company needs to be building models, right? Like what should people be thinking about building right now?
I think I have to disagree with you that anything right now is chaff. And the reason for that is the analogy that I always bring up, and I'm old enough to remember this era, was right now, this era of AI, it feels like the early web.
Sure.
And in the early web, everyone treated it like a publishing medium. Like we still say web page, right?
Yeah,
That's from the fact that we thought of the web as a publishing medium. And back at the start of the web, doing something like taking the phone book and putting it online, completely revolutionary, right? When you think about it, it's very prosaic to you and me because we can call a guy to come with a car and drive us to Palo Alto to have dinner.
It was magic.
It's magic, right? But back then, that was like the first thing that people were doing. We had these static pages.
Yep.
But what did it mean? It meant that you could, in real time, update the phone book, and everybody had access to the same phone book to find businesses and people that they wanted to talk to online, as opposed to having it distributed once a quarter, right? It doesn't sound like much today, but it was revolutionary at the time, right? And then eventually, people put newspapers, magazines online. The first sort of like private blogs came online for the first time. And so, that's what the early web was, these kind of sort of applications, but it had two properties. The first property was, it was very, very accessible, right? Pretty much anybody could put up a website. If you have a computer connected to the web, you could put up a website and anybody in the world could go look at your website, right? Very accessible. And the second thing was people playing with the technology had an understanding that this is like powerful and general purpose, but we don't know what it's going to be yet. AI is in a similar state right now. So it's extremely accessible. Anyone can access the OpenAI API, and the open source community is doing a great job shipping quantized models that you can run on even a single Mac today, which I think is going to get very powerful. But we also aren't quite sure exactly how this is going to be valuable. The core applications are already there. Like Chroma's bread and butter, for example, is this chat with your documents, nonlinear interaction with text, have conversations with data, right? To my mind, that's like the phone book website, right? It's early. But what these combination of factors do, a general purpose technology that's very powerful, easily accessible, means people can just experiment.
Cool.
Right? And things that look like toys today turn out to matter a lot later on. And the example that I always think about this is, do you know what the dancing baby is? I'm too old, this is the problem. The dancing baby is pretty much the first viral GIF.
Oh yes, okay, yeah, I'm familiar with this.
Yeah, the first viral GIF, and this was on like late night talk shows. Like they would just show like, look at this crazy animation. And of course it's a toy, of course it's chaff. People would like just randomly put the dancing baby on their website. But it showed people, hey, wait a minute, you can put dynamic content on the web. You can put dynamic content, not just static pages. Let's think about that. Let's put new stuff. Let's make this somehow useful, right? And you go one step beyond that. You're like, okay, well, we've got dynamic content. How do we do interactive content? And you just keep going. You just keep building on that. So things that might look like chaff are actually valuable experiments, even if they don't work out, right?
I love that answer. I'll try to rephrase my question to get at a sort of a different crux. Like
your question was, what should people be building?
Yeah, I guess initially I was sort of talking about the 2023 GPT wrappers thing, which I'll still stand on my ground of like, I agree. A lot of the stuff that is fun or like isn't necessarily like this big company, like is still great to build. Some of it just kind of felt like people making money grabs, which hey, even then, cool. My question is like, we have these incredibly powerful AI models. Not everyone needs to go and become building stuff like what you're building or building stuff like what OpenAI and other companies are building. What should people be how should they is there any difference in the way they should think about building with this stuff versus the early web versus software and SaaS with these amazing tools that Chroma and other companies are building? Like is there any differences there, or is it sort of the same principles of like, follow your curiosity, think about...
I have to say that it's about experimentation and curiosity. I have to say that it's really like that. And I think radical experiments are the thing that really matters, right? Just like following the consensus, following the crowd of what to build is pretty much definitionally not going to give you anything radical. So if you have like some kind of crazy idea, it's cheap to just hack it together, do like a minimal version of this. And part of Chroma's mission in this is retrieval is core to AI application development, right? We've been saying it since February. OpenAI finally set it up at Developer Day. It's core. And our mission is to get that the hell out of your way as a developer so you can focus on whatever your crazy idea actually is. And we want to fuel that experimentation. But yeah, I have to say it's about experimentation and curiosity. It's cheap. The experiments are cheap. Right. Literally over a weekend, you could try something, build something new, or do something in a new way, right? I think what this looks like in the long term, which I think is maybe more interesting and maybe gives a bit more structure to the question you're asking. I think there's 3 ways that sort of organizations and businesses and people will adopt AI. The first is you have some organization or business that's serving an existing market. It's already a company that's doing it well. And they will look at, okay, what processes inside the company can we now automate that we couldn't before? And for example, most data that's in Chroma today has never been in a database before, which speaks to the fact that, hey, this is data we can now actually automate and process for the first time. So they'll be looking for those things. And the way that will evolve is you'll have a team inside the company. They'll like have a mandate to try to do one thing. And then when they succeed, they'll do more and more and more things. So that's the first type. The second type is businesses that are really businesses or apps or anything that's only possible for the first time with AI.
Sure.
Right. And everybody having like a voice transcriber that could be on at all times, that's completely new. There's no way to do that, right? You could not in any economical way find like a way to just do full bore transcription for everything that you're saying or doing 100% of the time. Now you can. What does that enable? I don't know. Not yet, but people will figure it out. I mean, I've seen some interesting things in like personal devices that have that idea at the core, but what the value is, I don't know yet. And that's the biggest category in my mind. Like the stuff that you describe as GPT wrappers, that's by far the biggest category. It's the things that are enabled for the first time. It's the biggest space to explore. The third category, which hasn't emerged yet, but I'm sure will over the next probably 12 to 24 months if I had to make a bet, is new businesses going after existing markets, but rather than taking business processes that they already have and transforming them, they're going to build their company around AI processes for the first time.
Cool.
And I can see like a few things where I think that this might be possible. Unfortunately, I don't understand the dynamics of those categories very well, but things like that have a lot of paper shuffling. So real estate is the number one thing that comes to mind. Maybe healthcare, but that's got a really high regulatory burden. Logistics, I think, has a great chance of adopting this stuff. The law, maybe, although a lot of the billing structures there make it difficult to adopt anything new. And places and things where there's a lot of paper shuffling. It's, there's this kind of trope, right? That the best way to start a SaaS company, a software as a service company, go find some business person that's doing it using a spreadsheet to do something and make that a product.
Sure.
Right? Now it might be something like, go find a place in a business where people are like processing forms and just make that a product. And which sounds dull and boring, but getting this stuff out of the way lets us build different types of organizations that couldn't otherwise exist. So doing this kind of like really boring work, and I swear I must have one of the most boring takes of AI, or it's one of the lenses that I look at it through at least. Doing all of this stuff unlocks the other stuff, right? You can't get to it without getting this out of the way. So yeah, imagine the types of organizations that you could build if you didn't have to get over the overhead of literally manually doing all of that schlep. Imagine what you could build. Like, okay, I say imagine, but it's almost unimaginable because we're so used to it.
In the space of AI research, what research technologies in the next 5 to 10 years do you think that aren't quite here yet, that maybe could be, or maybe are sort of just being developed or implemented that really excite you?
Yeah, I'll start.
I asked this because when we filmed, there was a giant stack of research papers.
There still is. It's here somewhere. Look, there's stuff that I feel is really bread and butter important. A recent research paper called Direct Policy Optimization, which basically has a significant improvement in the compute efficiency of fine-tuning models, I think is actually a huge deal. Because again, it lowers the bar to what kinds of teams and organizations can fine-tune a model, which means the value of open source models goes up, the type of organizations that can adopt a large language model improves, right? A lot of that bread and butter work, making inference more efficient, making fine-tuning more efficient, pushes down the barrier of who this is in reach of. All of that's constantly very exciting. I'm always looking out for it because every time the models improve and every time more people can use models, Chroma becomes more valuable to them.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like industry-wide. Of course, the models will also continue to improve. Multimodal is very interesting and important. One thing I would like is for audio models to move beyond voice and go into music and I don't mean audio generation, I actually mean audio understanding, because we're very interested in the ability to understand and process data. Right? The generative models are very cool, don't get me wrong, but it's a different part of the ecosystem. And then the thing that's very Chroma specific, and we've started talking to a number of researchers about this because this is a research we want to directly support, is thinking about how retrieval and models and the actual generative model, the large language model or whatever it is, work together. There's good early research in this direction. But right now, when you think about how retrieval works, it's a little silly. You take your corpus of documents or data, you put it into Chroma, it becomes represented by embeddings. Queries come in, you embed them with the same embedding model, you retrieve the most relevant results. And then what do? You take that data and you put it into the model's context window as part of the context with the prompt and whatever other features. And then the model then immediately encodes it into its own internal representation. If you think about the way that the humans work and the way that software works, your interface to, like when I'm talking with you, right? I'm not also reminding you of everything we've ever said. You're pulling that out of your memory, right?
Shortened answers.
Yeah, you're pulling that out of your memory somewhere, right? And if you look at traditional software, similarly, nobody is interacting directly. Like a user of a software application is not interacting also directly with the database to then feed everything to the software program together.
Yeah.
The software is addressing the data through its own sort of protocols, right, by calling out to a database. That is very exciting because if we can create models or augment existing models to understand how to perform retrieval on their own in a representation that's more native to the internal representation of the models, you can see how this comes back to the Chroma founding story, then the way that this entire system works should be more accurate, more efficient. Right, and we're very excited to support a lot of that work. It's very early, but it's also increasing momentum right now. People, I think, in the research community have realized how interesting and important retrieval actually is. It's no longer about just having the model remember things implicitly in its weights. And there's a couple other advantages to this. The sort of metaphor or like story that we use internally for this is, right now, we have these models. It's huge. They know all of Wikipedia and a bunch of all these other things. But what we'd like to do, and we don't know if this is possible, is decouple the reasoning component of the model away from the memorizing component of the model. Because if you can do that, you now make the model steerable, controllable, interpretable by just parameterizing its function by what data you give it. And to go all the way back to traditional software, code is data. You can program a model that is a general purpose reasoner, you can program with skills by presenting it with data representing those skills, right? And that is a very exciting future world. And that really does change what Chroma is and does in the future if we reach that world. So that's something we're very excited about.
Very cool.
Yeah.
All right, this next question is a little odd, but
I'm an odd guy, so that's fine.
Great. So the question is essentially, can you try to describe how you think? And what I mean by that is like, when you're like two quick like examples to jump off of, like when you encounter a problem, what are some of your brain's knee-jerk reactions to it? Mm-hmm. Or what are some of the lenses you commonly find yourself looking at life through, whether at work, at home, wherever?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Unlike a fundamental level, my internal thinking is actually highly, highly visual.
Shape rotator. Sorry, how to do it.
I guess you did. But it's truly highly visual. I sort of get the shape of things for want of a better explanation. But over time, I've developed a few different lenses that I found are really helpful to my thinking about a number of things. And the most recent one, which I actually spent a bit of time cultivating, is For a long time, I had this problem where any sufficiently large idea I came across, and I think this is because of my Slavic background, any sufficiently big idea that I came across, I just dismissed as bullshit out of hand. Now, of course, a lot of the time, that's a good hit rate because a lot of big sounding ideas are nonsense, right? But the problem is well, you absolutely do want the few big ideas that are true.
Yeah.
And so I struggled with this for a long time, and I developed this lens where I was like, okay, this looks like bullshit on the surface, but let's examine two things. One, what would it take for this to actually be true? And two, what would the consequences of this being true be? And that has allowed me to sort of like step away from the this is obviously bullshit thinking and go around to, okay, like what does this actually really mean? And then be able to break it down and think about it in that way.
Awesome.
So that lens has been very, very helpful to me. One of my biggest bottlenecks actually as a founder has been, frankly, not being sufficiently ambitious. And that lens has allowed me to get around a lot of that.
What's something that people don't ask you a lot when you're talking about Chroma that you wish people asked you about more?
Good question. Let me think on it for a second.
Yeah.
That's a really good question. That's almost a Chroma interview question, actually. We have a lot of questions in our interview loop that resemble that. Let me answer this by thinking about what message about Chroma do I feel I haven't gotten out into the world enough, which I think it's like similar. And I think I haven't really talked about the concrete path I see to us being like an important company. Like, why is this important to you, Anton? Why do you think this is a company that matters and is worth building? And do you want the question or also the answer?
Both.
Well, the answer is something like, Chroma exists at a really unique time, building a product that you can only really build in a unique time. There are just not that many times in history where, first of all, you get to define an entire layer of a new technology as it emerges. And the reason that Chroma is uniquely positioned to that is because we found a niche that's very complementary to the development of AI without engaging necessarily directly in sort of the model improvement competition, although we will be contributing to that with our retrieval augmented research work. So we found a niche. Our timing is very, very good. And the other part of it is, from a business perspective, from the ability to grow a big, sustainable business, which is the thing that actually allows you to do these big, ambitious things, right? There's not that many times where businesses, organizations will want to move their data into a new system. That's a really hard sell most of the time. But right now, every organization is thinking, how am I going to adopt AI? How am I going to build applications with it? And Chroma is an enabling technology for that. There's just not that many chances in history to do what we're doing. And for me, that's an opportunity that's way too important to pass up, right? And that's on top of the role that we play in the ecosystem, enabling experimentation, making this stuff just work. It's on top of the fact that we've got difficult, challenging, interesting technical problems for us as a team to solve at pretty much every aspect of what we're building. But the fact that like there really is the possibility to build a generational company here because we are an enabler of this new technology wave, that's huge for me. It's like every startup, every founder knows that you have to go through a lot of difficult periods. You have to go through a lot of schlep. It's difficult to go that schlep without a sufficiently large vision, but like I feel like we've got that here. Yeah, I guess that's something I don't really get to talk about enough, but it is something that's really important to me.
That's an exciting answer. My last question is, what is your current life philosophy?
Current life philosophy.
One quick, easy question to end it with you.
My current life philosophy. I mean, my current life philosophy is enable Chroma to succeed and do whatever it takes to do that. This is the focus of my life. I pretty much organize and optimize other things around building this, and I think that that's kind of like it's what you have to do. So to unwind and to sort of reflect on a bunch of other stuff we've talked about. When I found a way to be ambitious about what I'm building here and what the team is building here, everything else clicks into place behind it. when you find something sufficiently big that you can be realistically ambitious about without feeling delusional, and to be clear, sometimes I do still feel delusional, but I've learned to punch that little demon down into my subconscious. When you have that, when you have something sufficiently ambitious that you actually genuinely deep down believe in, everything else starts to fall into place behind it. Like the things that matter indoor just automatically appear, right? You can start making every decision, answering every question on that basis.
Awesome.
Yeah, so if I have a life philosophy, it's probably make Chroma succeed.
That's a good answer. Anton, thanks for this. And thank you for building Chroma.
Of course, thank you, Jason. Great to see you.
Boom, we did it.
Sick, thank you.
Not too painful. Not too,
Sure.
That was awesome.